The stars stretched out above him like a sea of endless possibility. Yet, in the vast expanse of the galaxy, nothing had prepared him for the moment that would change his life forever. He had never expected to be caught in the middle of an intergalactic rescue mission, especially one that would force him to face not only unknown enemies, but a future he never imagined for himself. This wasn't a story about a soldier fighting for glory or a hero seeking fame. It was a tale about the heart, about sacrifice, and about two beings from opposite worlds finding each other in the most unexpected of ways. It all began with a mission, one that should have been routine. He and his team had been sent to patrol an isolated sector of the galaxy, a place where star systems lay abandoned and untouched by the larger galactic forces. No one ventured to this forgotten corner of space, not unless they had a reason to be there. But there was something strange about the transmission they had intercepted. Faint, urgent, and coded in a language he didn't understand at first. His gut told him that something was off. They couldn't ignore it. It was a cry for help, a plea that could have been from anyone in the galaxy, but the desperate tone in the voice on the other end of the signal was unmistakable. When they arrived at the coordinates, they found a small, seemingly uninhabited planet with nothing but a scattered array of wreckage. But then, amidst the chaos, there was something else, something moving. A figure, pale and fragile, was crawling through the wreckage, her breath ragged, her movements weak. He couldn't understand why, but something inside him snapped. Despite the danger of an unknown enemy lurking nearby, he acted. He couldn't leave her behind. She wasn't human, not like him, but he didn't care. She had the look of someone who had fought to survive, her alien features almost glowing in the dim light of the broken world. She didn't speak at first, not in any language he recognized. She looked up at him with eyes filled with both fear and relief, as if she had seen her salvation and had stood before her, wrapped in the uniform of a soldier who wasn't supposed to care. But he did. His mission had just shifted from survival to rescue. No questions asked. The way she looked at him, so vulnerable, yet so full of silent strength, struck a chord deep inside him. He had heard stories of alien species, of their differences, their wars, and their ways. He had been trained to be wary, to remain detached. But she had no weapons, no means to defend herself, and her world had been torn apart. In that moment, he knew he couldn't walk away. The hours that followed were a blur of trying to escape the planet's hostile atmosphere, navigating a crash-landed shuttle, and evading patrols sent by the very people who had decimated her world. She wasn't just another survivor. She was the key to something larger, a secret buried deep in her history, one that both her people and his own government had worked hard to keep hidden. But that would come later. For now, all that mattered was getting her to safety. As they sat together, hiding in the broken remains of a once great vessel, he looked at her with a mix of curiosity and concern. The woman, no, girl, he had realized, was still shaking, but the terror in her eyes had faded. She hadn't spoken much, but her expressions told a story of loss and fear, yet there was also a flicker of hope. He couldn't help but wonder why she was the only one left. Was she the last of her kind? The thought twisted something in him, but he quickly pushed it aside. He wasn't there to ask questions. He was there to protect her, to make sure she got out alive. Days passed in near silence. She refused to tell him much about herself. He could see the wariness in her eyes, the hesitation whenever he tried to ask. But in her gaze, he also saw something else. Trust. It wasn't easy for her. That much was clear. She had been betrayed. Her world had been destroyed by forces that she still didn't fully understand. But he had proven that he wouldn't harm her. He would help her. Slowly, they began to communicate, and each word they exchanged peeled away a little more of the mystery surrounding her. She spoke of her home, a distant world far from the reaches of human civilization, of the peace her people had once known before it was shattered. But despite the tragic tales she told, there was something remarkable about her, something that made him feel closer to her than anyone he had ever known. It wasn't her appearance or her strength. It was the fire in her eyes, the defiance in her spirit. She had lost everything and yet refused to break. There were moments when their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. It was strange, inexplicable. She wasn't supposed to feel this way for him. He wasn't supposed to feel this way for her. After all, they came from worlds that were at odds, that had never crossed paths until now. But there it was, an undeniable connection, a pull between them that neither of them could ignore. Was it just the isolation of their situation, or something more? In time, their bond deepened, though it was still complicated by the reality of their situation. She was an alien, a different species with different values, a different culture. He was human, a soldier trained to protect his own, not to play savior to a stranger. Yet, here they were, with their destinies now entwined in a way neither had ever expected. What started as a simple act of rescue had turned into something far more intricate. They found comfort in one another's company, a shared sense of purpose. But the question remained, could they ever truly bridge the gap between their worlds? Could they ever be more than two survivors clinging to each other for support? But things weren't that simple. As they journeyed together, avoiding enemies and searching for a safe haven, a new enemy emerged, one that neither of them had anticipated, a powerful force that had been tracking them. And now their lives were at risk once again. It was clear that the danger wasn't just external, it was internal as well. The truth about the girl's origins, about who was hunting her, was far darker than either of them had guessed. As the tension mounted, they realized that they weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for their future, one that seemed more impossible with each passing day. The girl's past was beginning to unravel, revealing secrets she had kept hidden, secrets that could change everything. But was she ready to face them? And what about him? Would his heart betray him, or would he stay true to the soldier he was trained to be? The choices they made in the days to come would determine whether they would live or die, whether their bond would be enough to overcome the forces that sought to tear them apart. And as they reached the edge of the galaxy, ready to face the unknown, the question lingered in the air. Was their love truly meant to be, or were they simply two souls destined to be torn apart by the realities of the universe? The answers would come soon enough, but for now, they had to survive. Together. The silence between them grew heavier with each passing hour. The small ship they had found was barely operational, its systems flickering on and off as if caught in a battle between life and death. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep them moving. For now, at least. He focused on keeping the ship afloat, but his thoughts kept drifting to her, this strange, fragile yet fierce alien girl who had somehow become the center of his universe in such a short time. She sat in the co-pilot's seat, staring out into the endless void of space. He wondered what she was thinking. Was she mourning what she had lost? Was she afraid of what lay ahead? Or was she still trying to decide if she could trust him? He wanted to say something, to ease the weight in the air between them. But what could he say that wouldn't sound hollow? Instead, he checked the ship's status again. The fuel was running low, and their location wasn't exactly safe. The people who had destroyed her world, whoever they were, would be searching for survivors. If they found her, they wouldn't hesitate to finish what they had started. And if they found him with her, he would be just as much a target. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "You don't have to help me." He glanced at her, surprised. After all they had been through, after everything he had risked, she thought this was a choice for him. He let out a quiet breath. "Yeah, I do." Her eyes flickered with something unreadable. Why? He didn't have an easy answer for that. Maybe it was because he had seen the desperation in her eyes when he first found her, or maybe it was because he had spent years following orders, never questioning them, and for once in his life, he was choosing to do what felt right. Maybe it was something deeper than that, something he wasn't ready to admit, even to himself. Instead of answering, he leaned back in his seat, staring at the stars ahead. "We'll find somewhere safe," he said instead. "Somewhere they can't find you." She didn't respond, but she didn't argue either. That was enough. For a while, they drifted through space in silence, letting the hum of the ship fill the void between them. He was exhausted, but he couldn't let his guard down. Not yet. He needed to keep them both alive long enough to figure out their next move. She finally looked away from the window, her expression unreadable. "You don't even know who they are, do you?" He shook his head. "No, but I know enough. They wiped out your planet, and they don't want anyone knowing about it. That's all I need to know." A shadow crossed her face. "It's not just that. They—" She hesitated, as if deciding whether she should continue. Then she shook her head. "It doesn't matter. They won't stop." The way she said it sent a chill down his spine. This wasn't just a war. It was something worse. "Then we make sure they don't find you," he said firmly. She stared at him for a long moment, then gave the smallest nod. It wasn't much, but it was something. Time passed slowly. They avoided main trade routes, kept their ship's signal low, and moved from one uncharted sector to another. Every stop brought new dangers: pirates, patrols, abandoned stations that could collapse at any moment. But they managed to stay ahead. As the days passed, something changed between them. She stopped sitting as far away from him, stopped keeping her distance. They talked more, little conversations at first, then deeper ones. She told him about her home, the way the sky had shimmered with twin moons at night, the way her people had lived in harmony, never suspecting that their peace would be shattered so easily. He listened, letting her words sink in. It wasn't just another destroyed colony. This was something deliberate. Someone had wanted her people gone, completely erased, and she was the only one left. The weight of that realization settled heavily on him. One night, while they were resting on a small, hidden outpost, he found her standing outside the ship, staring at the stars again. "You thinking about home?" he asked. She didn't answer at first. Then, quietly, "I don't know what I'm thinking about anymore." He understood that feeling more than he cared to admit. She turned to him, her gaze steady. "You could leave, you know. You don't have to keep running with me." He let out a dry chuckle. "You keep saying that, but I'm still here, aren't I?" She frowned, looking away. "I just don't want you to regret it." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I won't." Something shifted in the air between them. It wasn't spoken, but it was there, undeniable. He didn't know when it had happened, but somewhere along the way, she had stopped being just a stranger he had saved. She was something more now. Before either of them could say anything else, the ship's alarm blared. His instincts kicked in immediately. He rushed inside, checking the sensors. His stomach twisted. They had been found. A fleet, larger than anything he had ever faced alone, was closing in fast. There was no way to fight them. Their only option was to run. But even as he prepared to make an escape, he knew the truth. This time, running might not be enough. She stood beside him, her face pale but determined. "They won't stop until I'm dead." He clenched his jaw. "Then we don't let them catch you." The ship shook as the first blast hit their shields. Warnings flashed across the console. They had seconds before they were surrounded. He grabbed the controls, pushing the engines to their limit. They shot forward, diving into an asteroid field nearby, weaving between massive rocks that could crush them in an instant. The enemy ships followed, relentless. She was gripping the side of the console, her breathing fast but controlled. He could see it in her eyes. She wasn't afraid of dying. She had already accepted that fate long ago. But he wasn't ready to let that happen. Not now. Not ever. The ship twisted and turned, barely avoiding another blast. He gritted his teeth. They couldn't keep this up forever. They needed an escape route. Then she spoke, her voice steady. "I know a place." He glanced at her. "Where?" She hesitated. "It's dangerous, but they won't follow us there." That was all he needed to hear. He turned the ship toward the coordinates she fed into the system, pushing the engines harder than ever before. The pursuing ships hesitated for the briefest second. just enough time for them to slip away. As they broke free from the asteroid field, heading toward a place unknown, he stole a glance at her. There was more to her story, more than she had told him, and whatever secret she was keeping, it was about to change everything. The ship trembled as it broke through the last remnants of the asteroid field, its engines straining under the pressure. The silence that followed was suffocating, but they had no time to catch their breath. The enemy ships had hesitated, but they weren't gone. They would be coming, and soon. He gripped the controls tightly, his knuckles white. The girl beside him, his only ally in this endless chase, stared at the navigational screen, her eyes locked on the destination she had given him. A place she claimed was too dangerous for their pursuers to follow, but that meant it was dangerous for them too. "What's waiting for us there?" he asked, his voice low but urgent. She didn't look at him. Answers. That wasn't what he had asked, but it was all she was willing to give. The ship's proximity alarms flickered. Something was out there, something massive. It was still too far to be seen, hidden in the darkness of space, but he could feel it, an eerie presence pressing against them like a storm waiting to break. He cast her a quick glance, searching for any sign of hesitation, but she remained focused. If she was afraid, she wasn't showing it. Minutes stretched into an eternity as they neared their destination. The navigation system flickered again, struggling to get a proper reading. That was never a good sign. He adjusted the controls, fighting against the gravitational pull of whatever lay ahead. Then, through the viewport, he finally saw it. A planet, but not like any he had seen before. It loomed in the darkness, its surface shrouded in thick clouds that swirled like an endless storm. There were no signs of life, no visible landmasses, just a world consumed by an eternal, chaotic atmosphere. His grip tightened on the controls. "This is where we're supposed to go." She nodded. "They won't follow us here." "They can't." The way she said it sent a chill down his spine. The ship buckled as they entered the planet's outer atmosphere. Winds slammed against the hull with a force he hadn't expected, shaking the entire vessel. The control panel flickered wildly, warning alarms blaring. The readings were inconsistent. One moment, the gravity was stable. The next, it spiked dangerously. He fought to keep the ship steady. "We're not going to make it in one piece if this keeps up." She placed a hand on the console, her fingers moving across symbols he didn't recognize. The ship's systems adjusted, stabilizing slightly. He cast her a sharp look. "What did you just do?" She hesitated, then met his gaze. "This planet, it's connected to my people." His stomach twisted. "What do you mean, connected?" She exhaled slowly, like she was preparing to finally tell him the truth. "It's not just a planet. It's a place of power. My ancestors built something here, something that was meant to be forgotten." The ship shuddered again, dropping through thick clouds that flashed with violent lightning. He could barely see anything through the viewport, but he had no choice except to trust her. "If this place is so dangerous, why would we come here?" he asked, voice strained as he fought to keep them from crashing. She looked out the viewport, eyes distant. "Because it's the only way to end this." Those words settled deep inside him, heavy and cold. He didn't like what they implied. The ship finally broke through the storm clouds, and what lay beneath them made his breath catch. Towering ruins stretched across the surface, massive structures barely visible through the mist. They looked ancient, built from a material that pulsed faintly in the dim light. It didn't look abandoned. It looked asleep. He brought the ship down as gently as he could, landing on what seemed to be a solid platform. The engines hissed as they cooled, steam rising around them. For the first time in what felt like hours, there was silence. He unstrapped himself from the seat and turned to her. "All right. No more vague answers. What is this place?" She hesitated, then finally spoke. "It's a sanctuary, or at least it was. My people built it long ago to protect something. Something they were afraid of." His pulse quickened. And now we're walking right into it. She met his gaze, and for the first time since they met, he saw real fear in her eyes. We don't have a choice. That was what worried him the most. They stepped outside the ship, and the air was thick, humming with an energy he couldn't explain. The ruins stretched endlessly, carved with markings that seemed to shift under his gaze. He had seen a lot of strange things in the galaxy, but nothing like this. She moved ahead with purpose, leading him through the winding pathways between the towering structures. He followed closely, his hand hovering near his weapon. He wasn't sure what he expected to find here, but something about this place felt wrong. Then he heard it, a distant hum, deep and rhythmic, like the heartbeat of something enormous. He stopped in his tracks. She turned to him. "We're close." "To what?" She hesitated, then whispered, "The truth." That was when the ground beneath them shifted. A low, rumbling sound echoed through the ruins, and suddenly, the markings on the structures began to glow. The air crackled with unseen energy, sending a shiver down his spine. He reached for his weapon instinctively, but she grabbed his wrist. "Don't," she said quickly. "It's waking up." His pulse pounded in his ears. "What is?" Before she could answer, the ruins trembled again, and from the darkness ahead, something began to emerge. A figure, no, not a person, but something far older, something that radiated a power beyond anything he had ever encountered. Its form shifted, like it wasn't entirely bound by physical reality. And though it had no eyes, he knew it was looking at them. He took a step back, every instinct screaming at him to run. But she stood firm, her expression unreadable. "This is what they were afraid of," she murmured. The entity loomed before them, its presence suffocating. Then, without warning, it spoke, not in words, but in a voice that echoed directly in his mind. "You are not meant to be here." A sharp pain shot through his skull, and he stumbled. His vision blurred, and for a brief moment, he saw flashes of something. Memories that weren't his. Wars fought long before his time. A civilization torn apart. A secret buried deep beneath the surface of this planet. And at the center of it all, her. She turned to him, her expression solemn. "Now you understand." His breath came in short gasps. What are you?" She looked at him, sadness in her eyes. "The last of my kind. And the only one who can stop this." The ruins trembled again, and in the distance, the sky flashed as enemy ships broke through the clouds, their weapons locking onto their location. Their time had run out. The sky cracked with light as the enemy fleet descended, their warships slicing through the thick clouds like blades. He could see them clearly now, dark and menacing, their weapons already charging. There was no time to run, no time to hide. They had come for her, just as she had feared. His pulse pounded in his ears as he turned to her. "We need to move. Now." She didn't react. She just stood there, staring up at the descending ships, her face unreadable. The ruins around them pulsed with energy, as if they too sensed the impending danger. The figure before them, the ancient presence that had spoken to them, remained motionless, its form shifting in and out of reality. Then, in a voice that seemed to bypass the air entirely and resonate directly in his mind, it spoke again. "They do not understand what they awaken." He barely had time to process those words before the first blast struck. A beam of searing energy crashed into the ground nearby, sending a shockwave rippling through the ruins. He grabbed her wrist, pulling her behind cover as debris rained down around them. The impact sent tremors through the ancient structures, cracks forming in the stone-like material. She didn't resist, but when he turned to her, expecting panic or fear, he found something else instead: determination. "They think they can destroy this place," she said quietly. "But they don't realize," her gaze flicked toward the ancient figure. "They don't realize it's alive." A chill ran through him. He had felt something in the ruins the moment they landed, an energy that hummed beneath his skin, but he had assumed it was just remnants of whatever civilization had built this place. Now, he wasn't so sure. A second blast struck, closer this time. The air was thick with the scent of burning metal and charged particles. The enemy was closing in. He could see their dropships breaking through the clouds, preparing to deploy soldiers. They were running out of time. "We have to go," he said, gripping her shoulder. "If they get their hands on you." She cut him off. "It's too late for that." Before he could ask what she meant, the ruins around them came to life. The ground beneath their feet trembled, not from the enemy attack, but from something deeper, something waking up. The glowing patterns on the structures pulsed faster, shifting in strange, intricate sequences. Then, from the cracks in the stone, something emerged, tendrils of shimmering energy, weaving together into unfamiliar shapes. And then he heard it. A sound, low and resonant, like a heartbeat growing louder. The air itself vibrated with it, filling his chest, his bones. The ancient figure before them lifted its shifting form, turning toward the enemy fleet. "You have brought war to a place that remembers." The sky darkened, the swirling clouds above twisting unnaturally. The enemy ships hesitated, their formation faltering for the first time. Even they could sense that something was wrong. Then the ruins struck back. A shockwave of pure energy burst from the ground, ripping through the air like an unseen force. The first enemy warship in the formation was caught in it, its entire hull twisting and crumpling as if an invisible hand had crushed it. The explosion that followed sent a chain reaction through the fleet, throwing the once organized assault into chaos. He shielded his eyes as debris rained down from above. He had expected resistance, maybe hidden weapons buried in the ruins, but not this. This was something else entirely. She stood at the center of it all, her expression calm, almost sad. "They never should have come here," she whispered. His mind raced. "What is this place, really?" She finally turned to him. "It's not just a sanctuary, it's a prison." The words hit him like a cold wind. His instincts screamed at him to demand answers, but there was no time. The enemy fleet, though damaged, was still operational. Dropships were still landing, and squads of heavily armed soldiers were already advancing through the ruins. The ancient figure flickered, its form shifting again, its voice growing fainter. "They have chosen their fate." Then, just like that, it vanished. The ruins, still pulsing with power, remained awake, but whatever force had been protecting them was now retreating. He could feel it. The enemy would regroup, and when they did, they would strike even harder. She looked at him then, her eyes filled with something he couldn't quite place. Regret, or maybe acceptance. "They're not just here for me," she said. "They want what's buried here. They want what my people locked away." Another explosion rocked the ruins. Soldiers were closing in fast. He could already hear their weapons charging. He gritted his teeth. "Then we make sure they don't get it." She gave him a small, almost sorrowful smile. "That's the problem." She took a slow breath. "If we want to stop them, we might have to let it out." His blood turned cold. Whatever it was, whatever they had buried here, her people had sealed it away for a reason. And now, standing in the middle of a battlefield, with enemies closing in and an ancient power stirring beneath their feet, he realized something terrifying. The hardest choice wasn't just about survival. It was about what price they were willing to pay to win. The air was thick with tension, the ruins humming with an unseen force as enemy soldiers closed in. The ships above, though damaged, loomed like silent predators, waiting for the right moment to strike again. He could feel the weight of it all pressing down on him, the impossible choices, the unstoppable enemy, and the girl standing beside him, carrying secrets that had reshaped everything he thought he knew. She turned to him, her silver eyes reflecting the pulsing glow of the ruins. "If we do this, there's no going back." He swallowed hard. "Then tell me, what exactly are we letting out?" She hesitated, her gaze flickering to the massive structures around them, the ancient symbols shifting like they were alive. "A being my ancestors feared, something they fought to imprison because they knew it could end everything. Another blast struck nearby, sending a shockwave through the ground. The enemy was almost upon them. He clenched his fists, knowing they had no choice. They couldn't fight their way out. They couldn't outrun this. The only option left was the one that terrified him the most. "Then let's hope your people were wrong," he muttered. She stepped forward, placing both hands on the nearest structure. The glowing symbols flared, spreading outward like wildfire. The ruins trembled, the air itself crackling with energy. Then, slowly, the ground beneath them began to shift. A deep, guttural sound filled the air, not mechanical, not human. Something older, something waking up. The enemy soldiers froze, their weapons raised but uncertain. Even they could feel it now. The storm above twisted unnaturally, the swirling clouds breaking apart as something massive began to emerge from the depths of the ruins. A shape, dark and shifting, rose from beneath the ancient stone. It wasn't like the figure they had seen before. This was different, stronger, more complete. It didn't have a single form. It was a mass of energy and shadow, pulsing with a power that made the entire battlefield feel small. And then it spoke. Not in words, but in something deeper, a voice that pressed into their minds like a force of nature. "You have freed me." His breath hitched. The enemy soldiers hesitated, their formation breaking apart. Even their warships above seemed to falter, their weapons suddenly powerless against whatever had just been unleashed. She didn't back away. Instead, she lifted her chin, her expression unreadable. "You know why we came," she said. The presence shifted, its form twisting as if studying her. "I remember you." He felt the air tighten around them, an invisible force pressing against his chest. He could barely move, barely breathe. Whatever this was, it wasn't bound by the same rules of reality. The girl's voice remained steady. "They will never stop hunting me. They will never stop coming for this place. You know this." The shadow pulsed, the ruins beneath it cracking under the sheer weight of its presence. "And you wish for my help." The soldiers around them finally broke, some scrambling back, others standing frozen in place, their minds unable to process what they were witnessing. Even the warships in the sky began to retreat, their commanders realizing they had made a mistake. She nodded. "If they take this world, they will use what is buried here. They will turn it into a weapon." A silence stretched between them, heavy and endless. Then, finally, the entity shifted again, turning toward the sky. "Then let them fear what they wish to control." Without another word, the presence expanded. A wave of raw energy burst outward, sweeping across the battlefield like a storm. The enemy soldiers didn't have time to react. Their weapons shattered in their hands, their armor cracking as they were thrown back. The warships above, once so untouchable, were caught in the blast, their engines flickering before they were yanked from the sky like falling stars. The entire battlefield was consumed in light. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The ruins settled, their glow fading to a dim pulse. The storm above dissipated, the sky finally clear for the first time. The enemy was gone. The warships, the soldiers, erased in an instant. He exhaled shakily, his mind still reeling from what had just happened. But when he turned to her, he saw something that made his stomach drop. She was swaying on her feet, her expression distant. The energy around her was fading, her connection to whatever force had been awakened breaking apart. He reached for her, steadying her before she collapsed. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice tight. She gave him a weak smile. "I set it free, but that means I don't belong here anymore." His chest clenched. "No, no, we did this to save you." She lifted a hand to his face, her touch cool and light. "You did save me. But this place, it's part of me. And now that it's awake, I have to stay." He shook his head, refusing to accept it. There has to be another way. But she was already fading. Not like the others. Not violently. Just slipping away like she had always been a part of this world, and now it was calling her back. His hands tightened around her shoulders. "Please." She smiled, and for the first time, there was no fear in her eyes. "Just peace." "Thank you," she whispered, "for showing me what it meant to be free." Then, with one final shimmer of light, she was gone. The ruins fell silent. The battlefield, once filled with chaos, was now still. The war was over. The enemy was gone. And yet, as he stood there, staring at the empty space where she had been, he felt nothing like victory, just loss. He turned toward the sky, the stars stretching endlessly above. Somewhere, out there, another war would begin. Another battle would be fought. But here, in the ruins of a forgotten world, something ancient had been freed. And though she was gone, he knew he would never forget her. Because some people don't just change your life, they change the universe. The stars stretched endlessly before him, distant and cold, but he couldn't shake the feeling that she was still here somehow. The ship moved silently through the void, but the weight in his chest remained, a dull ache that refused to fade. The battle was over. The enemy was gone. The ruins had returned to their quiet slumber. And yet the galaxy felt different now, as if something fundamental had shifted, something no one else would ever understand. He ran a hand over the worn console, his mind replaying every moment. The way she had looked at him in those final seconds, the way she had smiled despite knowing what was coming. She hadn't been afraid. She had accepted it, maybe even known all along that this was how it would end. He had tried to fight it, to find another way, but in the end, it had never been his choice to make. The comm system crackled to life, snapping him out of his thoughts. A familiar voice filled the cabin, rough with concern. "You alive out there?" He took a breath before answering. "Yeah." There was a pause. "Didn't think you'd make it." "Neither did I." The silence stretched between them, heavy with the things left unsaid. They wanted details, explanations, but he wasn't ready. Maybe he never would be. He adjusted the ship's course, watching as the navigation system locked onto a distant starport. The rest of the galaxy had moved on, oblivious to what had happened. To them, it was just another skirmish, another lost world that wouldn't be spoken of again. But he knew better. He had seen what was buried beneath that planet, had felt the raw power that had been unleashed. And he had lost her. As the ship approached the docking station, the lights of the station flickered against the darkness, a stark reminder of how life continued, no matter what was lost along the way. He exhaled slowly, forcing himself to focus. He had to move forward, even if a part of him remained behind, lost in the ruins with her. The docking clamps engage, locking the ship in place with a quiet hum. He stepped onto the metal platform, the sounds of the bustling station washing over him. People moved in every direction, their voices blending into a dull roar. For the first time in a long while, he felt out of place, as if he didn't belong here anymore. A figure approached him, someone he recognized, an old ally, someone who had fought beside him before. Their eyes searched his face, reading everything he wasn't saying. "You did it, didn't you?" He nodded, but his expression remained distant. "It's over." They hesitated before speaking again. "And her?" He looked away, his jaw tightening. "She's gone." The words felt hollow, inadequate. How could he explain what had really happened? How could he make them understand that she hadn't just disappeared? She had become something else, something beyond their reach. His ally didn't press further. Instead, they simply nodded, as if sensing that some wounds weren't meant to be touched. "You did what you had to." Maybe, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like loss. He moved through the station, letting the familiar noise and motion ground him. There were reports to make, questions to answer, but none of it seemed to matter. The galaxy would keep turning. The wars would continue, and the people who had fought and bled for something greater would be forgotten. But not her. He stopped at a viewing deck, staring out at the vast emptiness beyond. He thought about what she had said before she faded, how she had thanked him for showing her freedom. She had spent her life running, trapped by the expectations of others, by the weight of a history she hadn't chosen. And in the end, she had made her own choice. Maybe that was enough. A small, almost imperceptible pulse of warmth brushed against him, a feeling rather than a sound. He closed his eyes, exhaling as a faint smile touched his lips. She wasn't truly gone, not completely. He turned away from the window, squaring his shoulders as he walked back into the station. There was still work to do, battles to fight, people to protect. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of the universe, the ruins remained, guarding their secrets. She had changed him, and he would carry that with him for the rest of his life. Some stories weren't meant to be written in history books. Some stories lived in the hearts of the people who remembered them. And he would remember, always.